The dusty Nevada town of Birch Creek had given up on the black Mustang stallion they called Bandit, a horse so dangerous that 3 professional trainers had walked away defeated. What no one could have imagined was that salvation would come from 12-year-old Ivy Parker, a blind girl who arrived at her grandfather's ranch with nothing but grief and an extraordinary gift for hearing what others missed. When Bandit finally revealed what he'd been trying to communicate through his rage, when his shocking actions toward young Ivy left experienced horsemen speechless, the entire community realized they'd witnessed something that would challenge everything they believed about limitations, healing, and the mysterious bonds that form between broken souls. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The old pickup truck coughed and wheezed as it turned off the main highway onto the gravel road leading to Lone Star Ranch. Dust clouds billowed behind the worn tires, creating a hazy curtain that seemed to separate the world Ivy Parker was leaving behind from whatever lay ahead. She pressed her face against the cool window glass, feeling the vibrations of the uneven road through her cheek, listening to the symphony of sounds that painted pictures in her mind more vivid than any photograph. "Almost there, sweetheart," Gloria Parker said softly, her voice carrying the weight of months of grief and uncertainty. She glanced in the rearview mirror at her daughter, noting how Ivy's fingers traced patterns on the dusty window. A habit she'd developed since losing her sight wasn't the only thing that made her different from other children. The gravel crunched, louder now, and Ivy could hear something else, something that made her sit up straighter. It was rhythmic, powerful, like thunder trapped in a box. Her head tilted slightly, the way it always did when she was concentrating on deciphering a new sound. "What's that noise, Mom?" Gloria listened for a moment, then her shoulders tensed. "I'm not sure, honey. We'll find out soon enough." The truck rounded a bend, and suddenly the ranch spread out before them. Weathered wooden fences marked property lines that stretched toward distant mountains, and a modest farmhouse sat surrounded by various outbuildings. But dominating the scene was a large corral, where something dark moved with violent energy. Chester Stone emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. At 68, he still carried himself with the straight-backed dignity of a man who'd spent his life working the land, though the lines around his eyes spoke of recent sorrows. His weathered face lit up when he saw the truck, but the expression was tinged with worry. "Gloria, Ivy," he called out, his voice rough with emotion as they climbed out of the vehicle. "Welcome home." Gloria embraced her father, and Ivy felt her. Way around the truck, her white cane tapping gently against the ground. The sound from the corral was much louder now, and she could distinguish individual elements. Hooves striking wood, the squeal of stressed fence posts, and underneath it, all something that sounded almost like frustration. "Grandpa Chet," Ivy said, moving toward his voice with the confidence of someone who'd learned to navigate by sound and memory. "There's a horse over there that sounds upset." Chet's face darkened as he pulled his granddaughter into a gentle hug. "That would be Bandit, and upset doesn't begin to cover it, little darling." The rhythmic pounding stopped suddenly, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch across the entire ranch. Ivy turned toward the corral, her head cocked in that listening pose that had become second nature. "He's watching us," she said quietly. "How can you possibly know that?" Gloria asked, instinctively moving closer to her daughter before Ivy could answer. Lance Moore appeared around the corner of the barn, his young face drawn with exhaustion. The 19-year-old ranch hand had been working since dawn, and it showed in every line of his posture. "Mr. Stone," Lance said, nodding respectfully to the family. "I've got his feed ready, but he won't let me anywhere near the gate. Been like this all morning." Chet sighed deeply, the sound carrying years of frustration. "Lance, this is my daughter Gloria and my granddaughter Ivy. They'll be staying with us for a while." Lance smiled warmly at Gloria, then looked uncertainly at Ivy. He'd never been around a blind person before and wasn't sure of the protocol. "Hi, Lance," Ivy said, sensing his discomfort. "You smell like hay and leather. Do you take care of all?" The horses. The directness of her observation broke the tension, and Lance grinned. "Most of them, yeah, though I wouldn't say I take care of Bandit so much as I just try to stay out of his way." "How long has he been here?" Ivy asked, moving slowly in the direction of the corral. "About 3 months now," Chet replied, staying close to his granddaughter. "Found him in Diamond Valley with a nasty gash on his leg and his spirit completely broken. Dr. Fox patched him up physically, but something inside that horse is still bleeding." Ivy stopped walking when she was about 20 feet from the corral fence. The silence stretched on, but she could sense the horse's presence like a weight in the air. Her fingers tightened on her cane as she concentrated on the subtle sounds that others might miss. The whisper of breath through flared nostrils, the soft shuffle of hooves in dirt, the creak of leather-wrapped fence posts straining under pressure. "What happened to him before you found him?" she asked. Lance and Chet exchanged glances. "We think he was part of a wild herd that got scattered by poachers," Chet explained. "Found tracks suggesting some kind of chase through the valley. Best guess is he saw something that traumatized him, maybe lost his family in the process." "Has anyone tried to work with him since he got here?" 3 different trainers, Lance said, shaking his head. Pearl Hunt from the neighboring ranch gave it a shot first. She's been working horses for 30 years, and she lasted exactly 1. His session said he wasn't mean, just unreachable. "Then we brought in a fellow from Reno," Chet continued, "specialist in difficult horses. He tried for 2 weeks and finally said Bandit was too damaged to save. Recommended we put him down." Ivy's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Put him down? But he's not sick, is he?" "No, sweetheart," Gloria said gently. "Some people think when a horse can't be trained, when it's too dangerous to handle, it's kinder to—" "That's not kind," Ivy said firmly, surprising everyone with the steel in her young voice. "That's giving up." A soft snort came from the corral, so quiet that only Ivy seemed to hear it. She turned her head slightly, as if listening to a whispered conversation. "He doesn't trust people because someone hurt him," she said matter-of-factly. "But he's not mean. He's scared." Lance looked skeptical. "Miss Ivy, with all due respect, this horse has charged the fence every time someone gets close. Yesterday he nearly broke through the top rail when Dr. Fox came by to check on him." "Did Dr. Fox try to touch him?" "Well, yeah, he was trying to. Examine the leg wound." Ivy nodded slowly. "So a stranger approached him and tried to put hands on an injury that probably still hurts. Of course he got defensive." The adults fell silent, struck by the simple logic of her observation. From the corral came another soft sound, almost like a sigh. "I'd like to try something," Ivy said, taking a step toward the fence. "Absolutely not," Gloria said immediately, moving to block her daughter's path. "Ivy, this isn't a pony ride. This horse is dangerous. Mom, I can hear things you can't. I know he's big and I know he's scared, but I also know he's listening to us right now. He's curious about me." Chet studied his granddaughter's face, seeing something there that reminded him of his late wife Mary, who'd had an uncanny way with animals. "What exactly do you want to try, little darling?" "Just talking to him. From right here, not any closer. I want to see if he'll respond to my voice." Gloria looked to her father for support, but Chet was considering the request seriously. "I suppose. There's no harm in talking, as long as you stay well back from the fence." Against her better judgment, Gloria stepped aside, though she remained close enough to grab Ivy if needed. Ivy faced the corral and spoke in a gentle, conversational tone. "Hi, Bandit. I'm Ivy. I know you don't know me, and I know you probably don't want visitors right now." The silence that followed seemed to hold its breath. Then, from within the corral, came the soft sound of movement. Not the violent pacing they'd heard before, but something more deliberate. "I can't see you," Ivy continued, but I can hear you moving. You're not running around angry anymore. You're just standing there, aren't you? Lance's eyes widened as he looked toward the corral. The massive black stallion stood motionless near the center of the enclosure, his head turned toward the girl's voice. I lost someone too, Ivy said softly. My dad died in a car accident 6 months ago. Sometimes I get so angry about it that I want to break things, just like you've been doing with that fence. The horse took a single step forward, then stopped. But being angry all the time is exhausting, isn't it? And it doesn't bring them back. Another step forward. Chet felt his breath catch in his throat as he watched the horse's ears prick forward, focused intently on Ivy's voice. I know you miss your family. I know you're hurt and scared and tired of people trying to force you to do things you're not ready for. But maybe we could just be sad together for a while. You don't have to trust me. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but you don't have to be alone with all that anger either. The stallion moved closer to the fence, his massive hooves silent in the soft dirt. Lance reached out to pull Ivy back, but Chet caught his arm, shaking his head slightly. That's close enough for today, Ivy said, as if she could sense the horse's proximity. I'm going to go inside now, but I'll come back tomorrow if you want me to. If you don't want me to come back, just let me know somehow, okay? She turned away from the corral and began walking toward the farmhouse, her cane tapping steadily against the ground. Behind her, the adult stood transfixed as Bandit followed her movement along the fence line, his head stretched over the top rail, watching until she disappeared into the house. Well, I'll be damned, Lance whispered. From inside the corral came a sound none of them had heard in 3 months, a soft, questioning whinny. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Dawn came early to Lone Star Ranch, painting the Nevada landscape in shades of gold and amber that Ivy could only imagine through the warmth on her face and the changing quality of sounds around her. She'd been awake for an hour, listening to the ranch come alive, roosters crowing, cattle lowing in distant pastures, and underneath it all, the restless movement from Bandit's corral. The kitchen smelled of coffee and bacon when she made her. Way downstairs, her fingers trailing along the familiar banister that Chet had installed when he learned she was coming to stay. Gloria sat at the worn wooden table, her voice low as she spoke with her father. She can't seriously think she's going to work with that horse, Dad. You saw what happened to those other trainers. I saw what happened yesterday too, Chet replied quietly. Mary always said animals could sense things about people that we miss. Maybe Ivy has some of that gift. Ivy paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, but unable to help overhearing. She'd learned early that adults often discussed her limitations when they thought she wasn't listening, as if her blindness somehow affected her hearing. Morning, she said, entering the kitchen with deliberate cheerfulness. Both adults started slightly, and Gloria rose to guide her daughter to a chair. How did you sleep, honey? I know the sounds here are different from the city. I like the sounds here better, Ivy said honestly. Everything has more space around it. In the city, all the noises crash together. Here, I can separate them. Lance knocked on the back door before entering, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Morning, folks. Thought you'd want to know. Bandit's been acting strange since yesterday. Gloria tensed immediately. Strange how? More aggressive? No, ma'am. The opposite. He's been standing by the fence closest to the house all night. Haven't heard a single kick or charge since Miss Ivy talked to him. Chet raised his eyebrows. That's unusual. Can I go see him? Ivy asked, already knowing what the answer would be. Absolutely not, Gloria said firmly. Yesterday was one thing, but I'm not comfortable with you getting anywhere near that animal. I don't want to get near him, Mom. I just want to talk to him again, from the same distance as yesterday. Dr. Dale Fox's truck rumbled up the driveway, cutting short the debate. The veterinarian had been taking care of Lone Star Ranch's animals for 15 years, and his monthly checkups were as regular as clockwork. "Morning, everyone," Dr. Fox called as he climbed out of his truck, black bag in hand. He was a compact man in his 50s, with the practical demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of animal emergency imaginable. "Came by to check on our problem horse. Any changes since last week?" "You could say that," Lance said, grinning. "Dr. Fox, meet Miss Ivy Parker, Chet's granddaughter." Dr. Fox shook Ivy's hand, his grip gentle but assessing. "Pleasure to meet you, young lady. I understand you had quite an effect on Bandit yesterday." "I just talked to him," Ivy said simply. "Has anyone ever just talked to him before, without trying to do anything to him?" The veterinarian considered this question seriously. "Can't say that they have. Most folks approach horses with an agenda, training, medical care, moving them from one place to another. Pure conversation isn't something we typically think about." "Animals understand more than people give them credit for," Ivy said. "My dad used to say that emotions are a universal language." Dr. Fox glanced at Gloria, noting the flicker of pain that crossed her face at the mention of Ivy's father. "Your dad sounds like he was a wise man. Would you like to come with me while I check on Bandit? I'd be curious to see how he reacts to you being present during a medical examination." "Dale," Gloria started, but Chet held up a hand. "She stays well back from the fence," he said, "and at the first sign of trouble, she comes straight back to the house." The small group made their way across the dusty yard toward the corral. They approached. They could see Bandit standing near the fence, his dark coat gleaming in the morning sun. The stallion was magnificent, nearly 17 hands tall, with the muscular build of a horse bred for endurance and power. "He's beautiful," Ivy said softly, though she couldn't see him. "How do you know?" Lance asked, genuinely curious. "I can hear how he moves. Strong horses sound different when they walk, more deliberate, more grounded. And I can hear his breathing. It's steady and deep, not shallow like a nervous horse." Dr. Fox approached the corral gate cautiously, his bag held low and his movements slow. Bandit's ears flattened slightly, and his weight shifted to his hindquarters, a clear warning posture. "Easy, boy," Dr. Fox murmured. "Just want to take a look at that leg." The stallion snorted and backed away, his eyes never leaving the veterinarian. "He remembers you," Ivy observed, "and he remembers that whatever you did last time was uncomfortable." "Medical treatment often is uncomfortable," Dr. Fox replied, though he stopped his approach. "But that leg wound needs monitoring to prevent infection." "What if you didn't try to touch him today?" Ivy suggested. "What if you just looked at the leg from outside the fence? He might let you see if he doesn't think you're going to grab him." Dr. Fox looked skeptical, but something in the girl's tone made him reconsider. "I suppose visual inspection is better than no inspection at all." He moved to a position where he could see Bandit's injured leg through the fence rails. The stallion remained tense, but didn't retreat further. "Ivy," Dr. Fox said slowly, "could you talk to him while I look? Keep his attention on you instead." "Of me? Hi, Bandit," Ivy said, her voice carrying the same gentle tone as the day before. "Dr. Fox is here to check on your leg. He's not going to touch you today, just look. He wants to make sure you're healing properly." The stallion's ears swiveled toward her voice, and his posture relaxed slightly. "I know doctors can be scary," Ivy continued conversationally. "I've had to see a lot of doctors since I lost my sight. Most of them mean well, but they always want to poke and prod and shine lights in your eyes, even when you tell them it doesn't hurt." Dr. Fox worked quietly, observing the healing wound from multiple angles. The injury was on Bandit's left hind leg, a jagged scar that spoke of either barbed wire or sharp rocks. To his professional eye, it appeared to be healing well, with no signs of infection or complications. "Sometimes the worst part isn't the medical stuff," Ivy said to Bandit. "Sometimes it's all the people staring at you like you're broken, like you're not the same as you were before, whatever happened to you." The stallion took a step closer to the fence, his attention completely focused on the girl's voice. "But you're not broken, are you? You're just different now, and different doesn't mean less." Dr. Fox finished his examination and stepped back from the fence, amazed at how calm the horse had remained throughout the process. "The wound is healing beautifully," he announced. "Better than I expected, actually." "See?" Ivy said to Bandit. "Good news, you're getting stronger." As if understanding her words, the stallion nickered softly, the same questioning sound he'd made the day before. Pearl Hunt's truck pulled into the ranch yard at that moment, dust billowing behind it. The 60-year-old horse trainer climbed, out with the purposeful movements of someone accustomed to handling large animals. She'd been Chet's neighbor for 20 years, and her reputation for training difficult horses was legendary throughout Nevada. "Heard you had some excitement yesterday," Pearl called out as she approached the group. Her weathered face bore the skeptical expression of someone who'd seen too many amateur horse enthusiasts get hurt by animals they didn't understand. "Pearl, meet my granddaughter Ivy," Chet said. "Ivy, this is Pearl Hunt, the trainer I told you about." Pearl looked Ivy up and down, taking in the white cane and the confident way the girl held herself. "So you're the one who's got everyone talking. Word travels fast in a small town." "I just talked to him," Ivy said, sensing the woman's doubt. "I didn't do any training. Talking's fine," Pearl said briskly. "But this horse needs professional handling, not conversation therapy. 3 months of coddling hasn't gotten us anywhere." She marched toward the corral gate with the determination of someone preparing for battle. Bandit immediately tensed, his ears flattening and his weight shifting to his hindquarters. "Pearl," Dr. Fox warned, "maybe we should take this slowly." "Slow is what got us into this mess," Pearl replied, reaching for the gate latch. "Sometimes a horse needs to know who's boss." The moment her hand touched the metal latch, Bandit exploded into motion. He charged toward the fence with a fury that made everyone step back instinctively. The stallion reared up on his hind legs, his front hooves striking the air mere inches from where Pearl stood. "Get back!" Lance shouted, grabbing Pearl's arm and pulling her away from the fence. But instead of continuing his aggressive display, Bandit suddenly stopped. His attention had shifted to Ivy, who hadn't moved during the commotion. The stallion's ears swiveled toward her and his breathing gradually slowed. "It's okay," Ivy said quietly, not to the humans around her, but to the horse. "Nobody's going to force you to do anything, not today." The transformation was immediate and startling. Bandit lowered himself to all 4 feet and backed away from the fence, his eyes still fixed on the girl, but his posture no longer threatening. Pearl stared in disbelief. "How did you do that?" "I didn't do anything," Ivy said honestly. "I just let him know he was safe." Dr. Fox shook his head in amazement. "In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything quite like that." "There's got to be a logical explanation," Pearl insisted, though her voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Horses don't just calm down because a child talks to them." "Maybe not," Chet said thoughtfully, "but they do respond to people who understand them. Mary used to say that some folks are born with the ability to speak horse. Maybe Ivy inherited that gift." Gloria, who had remained silent during the entire encounter, finally found her voice. "Gift or no gift, I still don't think it's safe for her to be around that animal." "Mom," Ivy said patiently, "I'm not asking to get in the corral with him. I'm just asking to be allowed to visit him, to keep talking to him." "What's the harm in that?" Dr. Fox asked. "She's clearly having a positive effect on him, and she's staying at a safe distance." Pearl brushed dust off her clothes and fixed Ivy with a measuring look. "You say you can hear things in the way he moves. What do you hear right now?" Ivy tilted her head, concentrating on the subtle sounds coming from the corral. "He's calmer. than he was when you first got here, but he's still alert. He's not pacing or moving around much, just shifting his weight from one foot to another. His breathing is steady, and... She paused, listening more intently. "And what?" Pearl prompted. "He's waiting," Ivy said with certainty. "He's waiting to see what we're going to do next." Lance whistled low under his breath. "She's right. Look at him. He's just standing there watching us." Pearl studied the stallion for a long moment, her professional eye taking in every detail of his posture and expression. "I'll be damned," she murmured. "That horse isn't angry anymore. He's curious." The revelation hung in the air like desert heat, shimmering with possibilities none of them had considered before. In the corral, Bandit stood motionless, his dark eyes reflecting an intelligence that suddenly seemed less dangerous and more hopeful. 3 days passed with an uneasy routine settling over Lone Star Ranch. Each morning, Ivy would sit on the porch steps after breakfast, facing the corral where Bandit waited. Their conversations had become a ritual that the entire ranch seemed to revolve around, with Lance finding excuses to work nearby, and even Chet pausing his daily chores to listen. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Ivy settled into her usual spot, the wooden steps warm beneath her legs. She could hear Bandit moving restlessly in his enclosure, the soft thud of hooves accompanied by occasional snorts of frustration. "You seem agitated today," she said, addressing the stallion directly. "Did something happen?" From the barn, Lance emerged carrying a bucket of oats, his face troubled. "Miss Ivy, I think Sheriff Ford is coming up the drive. That's probably what's got Bandit stirred up." The sound of tires on gravel confirmed Lance's observation, and moments later, Sheriff Ray Ford's patrol car pulled into the ranch yard. The Izin's 50-year-old lawman stepped out slowly, his weathered face serious beneath the brim of his hat. "Morning, folks," Sheriff Ford called out, his tone formal. "Chet around?" "Right here, Ray," Chet said, emerging from the equipment shed with grease-stained hands. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Ford glanced toward the corral, where Bandit had begun pacing again, his movements sharp and agitated. "Had a complaint. Filed yesterday. Someone's concerned about public safety regarding that stallion of yours." Ivy felt her stomach drop, though she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned to school her features when adults discussed her limitations or safety concerns, a skill developed through years of being talked about rather than talked to. "What kind of complaint?" Chet asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Pearl, Hunt stopped by the station yesterday evening. Says she's worried about liability issues, especially with a child being involved. Her exact words were that someone's going to get hurt, and when they do, there'll be lawsuits." Gloria appeared on the porch, having heard the conversation through the open kitchen window. "Sheriff, my daughter hasn't done anything dangerous. She talks to the horse from a safe distance." "I understand that, Mom," Sheriff Ford replied diplomatically. "But Pearl's got a point about liability. If something were to happen..." "Nothing's gonna happen," Ivy said quietly, her voice carrying across the yard with surprising authority. "Bandit isn't dangerous when people don't try to force him to do things he's not ready for." Sheriff Ford looked uncomfortable addressing a 12-year-old about such matters, but he pressed on. "Miss Ivy, I'm sure you mean well, but that's a wild animal. Wild animals are unpredictable by nature." "He's not wild," Ivy corrected politely. "He was born free, but he's been around people for months now. He understands human speech and responds to emotional cues. That's not wild behavior, that's intelligent behavior." From the corral came a sharp whinny, as if Bandit was adding his own commentary to the discussion. The sound made everyone turn toward the fence, where the stallion stood pressed against the rails, his attention focused entirely on the group of humans. Lance whistled softly under his breath. "He's following the conversation. Look at his ears. They're tracking whoever's speaking." Dr. Fox's truck appeared at the end of the driveway, and the veterinarian waved as he approached. Sheriff Ford looked relieved at the arrival of another professional opinion. "Dr. Fox," the sheriff called out as the veterinarian climbed out of his truck. "Glad you're here. We're discussing the safety situation with the Parker girl and the stallion." Dr. Fox adjusted his hat against the sun and studied the assembled group. "What kind of safety situation?" "Pearl Hunt filed a complaint about potential liability issues," Sheriff Ford explained. "She's concerned that allowing a child to interact with a dangerous animal could result in injury." "Has anyone been injured?" Dr. Fox asked mildly. "Well, no, but has the animal shown any aggressive behavior toward the child specifically?" Sheriff Ford shifted uncomfortably. "Not exactly, but that doesn't mean—" "In fact," Dr. Fox continued, "from what I've observed, the animal's behavior has improved significantly since Miss Ivy began talking with him. Yesterday, I was able to conduct a medical examination without sedation for the first time since he arrived here." Ivy smiled at this validation, though she kept her focus on the conversation at hand. "Sheriff Ford, what would it take to prove that Bandit isn't dangerous to me specifically?" The sheriff looked taken aback by the directness of her question. "I'm not sure I understand." "You're worried about him hurting me, right? What if I could demonstrate that he won't hurt me? What if I could show you that he's actually protective?" "Of me?" Gloria stepped forward quickly. "Ivy, absolutely not. You are not getting any closer to that horse." "I'm not talking about getting closer, Mom. I'm talking about proving that he can tell the difference between me and other people." Chet stroked his chin thoughtfully. "What did you have in mind, little darling?" "A test," Ivy said simply. "Have someone else approach the corral first. Someone Bandit doesn't know well. Then have me approach. Let everyone see the difference in his reactions." Sheriff Ford looked intrigued, despite himself. "That's not a bad idea, actually. We could observe from a safe distance." "Ray," Gloria said sharply, "you cannot seriously be considering using my daughter as an experiment." "It wouldn't be an experiment, Mom," Dr. Fox interjected. "It would be a controlled observation. We'd stop at the first sign of aggressive behavior." Janet Morrison's battered pickup truck rattled into the ranch yard, adding another complication to an already tense situation. The local store owner and unofficial town gossip climbed out with the eager expression of someone who smelled a good story developing. "Heard there was some excitement out here," Janet called out cheerfully. "Something about that killer horse?" "He's not a killer horse," Ivy said firmly, her patience finally beginning to fray. "He's a traumatized horse. There's a difference." Janet looked surprised to be corrected by a child, but recovered quickly. "Well, honey, I'm sure you mean well, but Pearl Hunt knows horses better than just about anyone. And she says that Stallion is unpredictable. Pearl Hunt tried to force her way into his space without his permission," Ivy replied. "If someone tried to force their way into your house when you were scared and hurt, you'd probably react badly too." Dr. Fox nodded approvingly at this analogy. "That's actually quite insightful. Trauma responses in animals often mirror trauma responses in humans." Sheriff Ford looked around the assembled group, clearly struggling with how to handle the situation. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Miss Ivy, you'll demonstrate your approach from your usual distance, the porch steps. Janet, you'll approach the corral fence from the same angle, but stop 20 feet back when I signal. We'll observe the difference in the animal's behavior." "I want it on record that I object to this entire plan," Gloria said firmly. "Noted," Sheriff Ford replied. "But the complaint has been filed, and I need to assess the actual risk level. This seems like a reasonable way to do that." Janet bustled toward the corral with the confidence of someone who'd never met an animal she couldn't handle. She'd grown up on a farm and had helped with cattle roundups in her younger days. "Easy, boy," she called out as she approached the fence. "Just want to get a look at you." Bandit's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His ears flattened against his head, and he reared up on his hind legs, striking the air with his front hooves. The stallion's eyes rolled white, and he let out a piercing scream that echoed across the ranch. "That's far enough," Sheriff Ford shouted, and Janet backed away quickly, her face pale. The group waited as Bandit continued his aggressive display, charging at the fence and wheeling away repeatedly. His breathing was labored, and foam flecked his muzzle. "Give him a minute to calm down," Dr. Fox advised. "Then we'll see how he reacts to Ivy." It took several minutes for Bandit's frenzy to subside. Finally, he stood in the center of the corral, his sides heaving and his attention fixed warily on the group of humans. "Your turn, sweetheart," Chet said gently. Ivy rose from the porch steps and began walking slowly toward the corral, her white cane tapping softly against the ground. As she moved, she spoke in the same conversational tone she'd used from the beginning. "Hi, Bandit. I know that was scary. Lots of strangers all talking about you at once. I don't like being the center of attention either." The stallion's ears pricked forward immediately, and his breathing began to slow. "Sheriff Ford is here because he wants to make sure everyone stays safe. I told him you would never hurt me, but I think he needs to see it for himself." Ivy stopped at her usual distance from the fence, about 15 feet back. Bandit moved toward her slowly, his posture completely relaxed. "See," she said, addressing the group behind her without turning around. "He's not angry anymore. He knows I'm not going to try to control him or hurt him." The stallion stretched his neck over the fence, not quite reaching where Ivy stood, but clearly trying to get as close to her as possible. He nickered softly, the same questioning sound he'd made every day since their first meeting. Sheriff Ford removed his hat and scratched his head, clearly impressed despite himself. "Well, I'll be damned. That's the same horse?" "Same horse. Different approach," Dr. Fox confirmed. "Miss Ivy, can you back away slowly? I'd like to see if he follows your movement." Ivy took 3 steps backward, and Bandit immediately moved along the fence line to maintain their connection. When she stepped forward again, he moved closer to the fence. "It's like he's bonded to her," Lance observed in wonder. "More than bonded," Dr. Fox said thoughtfully. "It's like he considers her part of his herd. That's protective behavior." Janet Morrison, who had remained silent since her unsuccessful approach, finally found her voice. "How is this possible? She's just a child." "She's a child who listens," Chet said proudly, "and sometimes that's more important than all the training and experience in the world." Sheriff Ford replaced his hat and looked around the group with a thoughtful expression. "I've seen enough. There's clearly no immediate danger to Miss Ivy, and the animal seems to respond positively to her presence." "What about Pearl's complaint?" Gloria asked. "I'll have a conversation with Pearl about the difference between legitimate safety concerns and professional jealousy," Sheriff Ford replied diplomatically. "Though I suspect word of this demonstration will spread through town fast enough on its own." Janet Morrison was already climbing back into her truck, clearly eager to share what she'd witnessed with anyone who would listen. "Ivy," Dr. Fox said as the group began to disperse, "I'd like to ask you something. Do you think Bandit would allow you to get closer to the fence? Not today, necessarily, but eventually." Ivy considered the question seriously. "I think he wants me to get closer, but I also think he's afraid of what might happen if I do." "What do you mean?" "Every time someone has gotten close to him, they've tried to change him or fix him or make him do something. I think he's worried I'll do the same thing." Dr. Fox nodded slowly. "So the key would be getting closer without trying to accomplish anything except being closer." "Exactly," Ivy said with a smile. "Sometimes the best way to help someone heal is just to sit with them while they figure out how to heal themselves." As the various visitors departed and the ranch settled back into its rhythm, Bandit remained by the fence, his gaze fixed on the porch where Ivy had resumed her seat. The message was clear to everyone who cared to look. Whatever bond was forming between the girl and the stallion, it was far from finished developing. The Nevada heat shimmered across the ranch as another week settled into routine, but changes were stirring beneath the surface. Word of Ivy's demonstration had spread through Birch Creek like wildfire, bringing curious visitors to Lone Star Ranch almost daily. Some came openly, parking along the fence line to catch a glimpse of the girl and the stallion. Others drove, by slowly pretending to have business elsewhere while stealing glances at the corral. Ivy sat on the porch steps in the early morning cool, listening to Bandit move around his enclosure. Today, his movements sounded different, more purposeful, less restless. She'd begun to distinguish between his various moods by the rhythm of his hoofbeats. Sharp and quick when agitated, heavy and slow when depressed. And today, something new, a measured, deliberate pace that spoke of decision-making. "You're thinking about something," she said to him. "Planning something, maybe?" The hoofbeats stopped entirely, replaced by the soft shuffle of a horse moving carefully across dusty ground. Ivy tilted her head, listening intently. He was approaching the fence, but not with his usual casual interest. This felt intentional. Gloria emerged from the kitchen with a cup of coffee, her footsteps hesitant on the wooden porch. The past week had been difficult for her, watching strangers arrive daily to gawk at her daughter and the horse. Sleep came, fitfully, filled with dreams of accidents and emergency rooms. "How long have you been out here?" Gloria asked, settling beside Ivy on the steps. "About an hour. I woke up early and couldn't get back to sleep. Bandit was already awake too. I could hear him moving around before dawn." "Ivy, honey, I need to talk to you about something." Gloria's voice carried the weight of a difficult conversation. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Fox said yesterday about you getting closer to the fence, and I'm not comfortable with it. I know everyone thinks this is some kind of miracle, but he's still a 1,000-pound animal that could hurt you without meaning to." Ivy was quiet for a moment, considering her response. "Mom, do you trust me?" The question caught Gloria off guard. "Of course I trust you. That's not the issue. Do you trust my judgment about Bandit specifically?" Gloria struggled with the answer. "I trust that you believe he won't hurt you, but believing something and knowing it are different things." From the corral came a soft whinny, and both women turned toward the sound. Bandit stood, pressed against the fence at its closest point to the porch, his head stretched over the top rail as far as anatomy would allow. "He wants to be closer too," Ivy observed. "Look how he's positioning himself." "That's exactly what worries me," Gloria replied. "What if his wanting to be closer isn't safe for you?" Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of an unfamiliar truck turning into the ranch yard. Unlike the casual gawkers who'd been visiting, this vehicle moved with purpose, kicking up dust clouds that spoke of urgent business. Carlos Rodriguez climbed out of the truck with the fluid movements of someone who'd spent his life around horses. The 45-year-old horse whisperer had driven 3 hours from Reno after hearing stories that stretched the boundaries of believability. His weathered face bore the skeptical expression of a professional who'd seen too many amateur horse enthusiasts get hurt by animals they didn't understand. Chet emerged from the barn to greet the visitor, wiping his hands on a rag. "You must be Carlos Rodriguez. Dr. Fox said you might be stopping by." "That's right," Carlos replied, his voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of childhood spent on ranches along the Mexican border. "Heard you've got an interesting situation developing here." "Interesting is one word for it," Chet said dryly. "My granddaughter there seems to have formed some kind of connection with a stallion that 3 other trainers gave up on." Carlos's eyes swept the ranch, taking in every detail. With professional assessment, his gaze lingered on the corral where Bandit stood, then moved to the porch where Ivy sat listening to their conversation. "The girl is blind?" he asked quietly. "Since birth," Chet confirmed. "But she's got better instincts with that horse than..." Most people have with their own dogs. May I observe? Carlos asked. I won't interfere, just watch how they interact. Of course. Ivy, we've got another visitor who'd like to see you and Bandit together. Ivy rose from the porch steps and made her way toward the corral, her white cane tapping softly against the ground. As she moved, she addressed Bandit in her usual conversational tone. Morning, Bandit. We've got company again. This gentleman is Carlos, and he works with horses professionally. He's not here to try to train you, just to watch and understand. The stallion's reaction was immediate but measured. His ears pricked forward, and he moved along the fence line to follow Ivy's approach, but there was none of the aggressive posturing that other strangers typically triggered. Carlos watched intently as Ivy took her usual position 15 feet from the fence. Bandit stretched his neck toward her, nickering softly in what had become their daily greeting. Remarkable, Carlos murmured. He's treating her like a lead mare. A what? Gloria asked, moving closer to hear the explanation. In wild horse herds, there's usually a lead mare, an older, experienced female who makes decisions about safety and movement. The other horses defer to her judgment and seek her approval. This stallion is showing classic submission behaviors toward your daughter. Doctor, Fox's truck pulled into the yard, followed closely by Pearl Hunt's pickup. The veterinarian climbed out with his usual professional demeanor, while Pearl emerged with the determined expression of someone preparing for battle. Carlos, Dr. Fox called out in greeting. Glad you could make it. I thought you should see. This before making any professional recommendations. Pearl marched toward the group with barely controlled frustration. Dr. Fox, I appreciate your enthusiasm for this situation, but we need to be realistic about what's happening here. And what do you think is happening here, Pearl? Carlos asked mildly. A dangerous animal is being allowed to manipulate a child. You threw her disability, Pearl said bluntly. Horses are intelligent enough to recognize weakness and exploit it. Ivy's shoulders stiffened at the word weakness, but she didn't turn around or interrupt her conversation with Bandit. That's an interesting theory, Carlos replied diplomatically. But it doesn't match what I'm observing. This horse isn't exploiting anything. He's bonding. Bonding with a 12-year-old girl who can't see him coming if he decides to charge. Bonding with someone who doesn't see him as a problem to be solved, Carlos corrected gently. There's a difference. Lance appeared from the barn, carrying a bucket of oats for the other horses. His presence caused Bandit to turn briefly, ears flattening in mild annoyance at the interruption. Easy, boy, Lance called out. Just taking care of Belle and Rusty. Notice that, Carlos said to the group. He's protective of his interaction time with the girl. That's not manipulation. That's attachment. Dr. Fox nodded in agreement. I've been documenting his behavior patterns for 2 weeks now. His stress indicators have decreased significantly since Ivy began visiting him. Lower heart rate, normal eating patterns, no destructive behaviors. Stress relief doesn't equal safety, Pearl argued. What happens when she gets too close and triggers his fight-or-flight response? That's actually what I'd like to test, Carlos said, with proper precautions, of course. Gloria stepped forward immediately. Absolutely not. We are not using my daughter to test theories about horse psychology. Mrs. Parker, Carlos said respectfully, I understand your concerns, but what I'm suggesting isn't dangerous if done correctly. Your daughter has already demonstrated that this horse responds differently to her than to other people. I'd like to see how close that relationship can safely develop. What exactly are you proposing? Chet asked. A gradual approach. Today, we observe from current distance. Tomorrow, perhaps Ivy moves 5 feet closer. We monitor the horse's reactions and proceed only if he remains calm. And if he doesn't remain calm, Gloria challenged, then we stop immediately. Carlos replied, but I don't think that will happen. This horse is displaying classic bonding behaviors. In my experience, bonded horses protect rather than threaten. Ivy finally turned away from the corral to address the group. "Why are you all talking about me like I'm not here?" The adults fell silent, embarrassed by the accuracy of her observation. "I can hear you discussing my safety and my abilities, as if I don't have opinions about either one," Ivy continued. "I'm 12, not 2. I can participate in decisions about my own life." "You're right, sweetheart," Chet said. "What do you think about Carlos's suggestion?" "I think Bandit wants to be closer to me, and I want to be closer to him. But I also think everyone's fear is making this more complicated than it needs to be." "How so?" Dr. Fox asked. "You're all worried about what might go wrong instead of paying attention to what's going right." "Bandit isn't dangerous to me. He's protective of me. There's a difference." Carlos smiled at this observation. "That's exactly right. Miss Ivy, in your opinion, how would Bandit react if someone tried to hurt you?" "He'd stop them," Ivy said without hesitation. "I can feel it in the way he positions himself when other people are around. He's watching them, not me." "That's herd behavior," Carlos confirmed. "He's appointed himself as her guardian." Pearl shook her head in frustration. "You're all anthropomorphizing a dangerous animal. Horses don't think like humans. They react on instinct." "You're absolutely right," Carlos agreed. "They do react on instinct, and this horse's instincts are telling him to protect this girl. That's not anthropomorphizing. That's understanding animal psychology." A comfortable silence settled over the group as they watched Ivy and Bandit together. The stallion had moved as close to the fence as possible, his attention completely focused on the girl's voice as she spoke to him about the weather, the visitors, and her plans for the day. "There's something else," Dr. Fox said quietly. "Something I haven't mentioned because it sounds impossible." "What?" Gloria asked with trepidation. "Yesterday, when I was examining Belle in the barn, Bandit became agitated. When I looked up, I realized Ivy wasn't in her usual spot on the porch. She'd gone inside for a drink of water. So this horse somehow knew she was gone before any of us noticed. He was calling for her, actual distress vocalizations. When she came back outside, he calmed down immediately." Carlos nodded thoughtfully. Bonded animals often develop heightened awareness of their partner's locations and emotional states. It's not unusual in deeply connected pairs. "But she's been here less than 2 weeks, Pearl protested. "Sometimes connection transcends time," Carlos replied, "especially when both parties are healing from trauma." As if to emphasize the point, Bandit nickered softly, and Ivy smiled in response. "Tomorrow," she announced to the group, "I'm going to move closer to the fence, not because anyone thinks I should, but because it feels right to both of us." The declaration hung in the desert air like a promise, carrying with it the weight of change that could no longer be avoided. The morning air crackled with tension as thick as the desert heat. 3 pickup trucks were already parked in the ranch yard when Ivy emerged from the house, their occupants engaged in heated conversation near the corral fence. Word had spread overnight about her intention to move closer to Bandit, and it seemed half of Birch Creek had arrived to either witness or prevent what they considered an inevitable disaster. Mrs. Betty Harmon, the elderly neighbor who'd supported Ivy from the beginning, stood nose to nose with Frank Hunt, Pearl's husband, their voices carrying across the dusty yard. "That child has more sense about horses than some folks who've been around them for 60 years, Betty declared, her weathered hands planted firmly on her hips. "Sense doesn't stop 1,000 pounds of muscle from trampling someone," Frank shot back. "This whole situation has gotten out of hand." Ivy paused on the porch, listening to the debate swirling around her life. In the corral, she could hear Bandit moving restlessly, his hoofbeats sharp and agitated. The crowd of people was affecting him negatively, just as she'd expected it would. Gloria appeared beside her daughter, coffee mug trembling slightly in her hands. "Maybe we should wait until things calm down. There are too many people here, too many opinions." "Mom, they're not going to leave," Ivy said quietly. And the longer we wait, the more worked up everyone gets, including Bandit. If I'm going to do this, it needs to be now. Chet emerged from the barn with Carlos Rodriguez, both men's faces grim as they surveyed the gathered crowd. Dr. Fox was checking equipment in his truck, preparing for any medical emergency, while Sheriff Ford leaned against his patrol car with the resigned expression of someone expecting trouble. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Carlos murmured to Chet. "Too many people, too much pressure. The horse is going to feed off all this anxiety." "Can you clear them out?" Chet asked. "On what grounds? It's a public spectacle now. Everyone thinks they have a right to witness this." Janet Morrison bustled between the various groups, her camera phone held high as she documented every angle of the drama. "This is going to be the biggest story Birch Creek has seen in years," she announced to anyone within earshot. Lance approached the porch, his young face creased with worry. "Miss Ivy, maybe we should postpone this. Bandit's been pacing since the first truck arrived. He's not in a calm frame of mind. That's exactly why I need to go to him now," Ivy replied, rising from the porch steps. "He's agitated because there are strangers here discussing him like he's a dangerous object instead of a living being with feelings." Pearl Hunt climbed out of her truck with deliberate movements, her expression set in lines of professional disapproval. "Young lady, I've been thinking about this all night, and I cannot in good conscience stand by and watch you put yourself in harm's way." "Mrs. Hunt," Ivy said respectfully, "I appreciate your concern, but this isn't your decision to make. It becomes my decision when I'll be called to testify at the lawsuit hearing after you get hurt," Pearl replied bluntly. The comment hung in the air like a slap, and Ivy felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and hurt. She'd grown accustomed to people discussing her limitations, but the casual assumption that disaster was inevitable cut deeper than usual. "There won't be a lawsuit," she said firmly, "because nothing bad is going to happen." Dr. Fox approached with his medical bag, his professional demeanor masking obvious concern. "Ivy, I want you to know that I'll be monitoring Bandit's vital signs throughout this process. The moment I see signs of stress or aggression, we stop everything." "How will you monitor his vital signs without getting close to him?" Gloria asked. "Visual observation," Dr. Fox explained. "Respiratory rate, body language, eye movement patterns. I can assess his condition from outside the corral." Carlos positioned himself near the fence with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent his life reading horse behavior. "Miss Ivy, before you move closer, I need you to understand something important." "What?" "Once you cross into what horses consider their personal space, about 10 feet from the fence, you're entering a different relationship dynamic. If Bandit accepts you at that distance, you become part of his world in a way that can't be undone." "What does that mean exactly?" Sheriff Ford asked. "It means the horse will consider her under his protection," Carlos explained. "He'll become territorial about her safety. If he perceives any threat to her, his response could be intense." "You mean dangerous," Pearl said grimly. "I mean protective," Carlos corrected. "But yes, protective behavior from a stallion can be dangerous to anyone he perceives as a threat." Ivy listened to this exchange with growing frustration. "You're all talking about Bandit like he's some kind of unpredictable wild animal, but you've seen how he responds to me. He's never shown aggression toward me, not once." "That's true," Dr. Fox acknowledged, "but Carlos is right about the territorial behavior. Once you're in his protective zone, he may react differently to other people approaching." From the corral came a sharp whinny, followed by the sound of hooves striking the fence. Everyone turned to see Bandit rearing up, his front legs pawing the air as he faced the crowd of onlookers. "He's getting more agitated," Lance observed. "All this talking and waiting is making him nervous." Ivy made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of moving toward the corral, she walked directly toward the center of the gathered crowd. "Everyone needs to step back," she announced, her young voice carrying unexpected authority. "You're scaring him." "We're scaring him?" Frank Hunt scoffed. "Young lady, you're the one planning to walk into the lion's den." "He's not a lion," Ivy replied calmly. "He's a horse who's been traumatized by people forcing him to do things he wasn't ready for. And right now, you're all doing exactly the same thing, forcing a situation instead of letting it develop naturally." Betty Harmon nodded approvingly. "The child's got a point. We're making this about us instead of about them." "What do you suggest?" Sheriff Ford asked. "Everyone except family and the professionals needs to leave," Ivy said firmly. "This isn't a show, and Bandit doesn't need an audience adding to his stress." Janet Morrison looked crestfallen. "But this is a historic moment. People have a right to witness it. People have a right to respect the privacy of a frightened animal," Ivy countered. "Would you want a crowd watching during your most vulnerable moments?" Carlos smiled at this response. "She's absolutely right. Miss Ivy, you're showing more wisdom than most adults twice your age." Reluctantly, several of the onlookers began drifting back to their vehicles. Frank Hunt lingered, clearly unhappy with the dismissal, but Pearl eventually tugged him toward their truck. "This isn't over," Pearl called out as they drove away. "When something goes wrong, don't say I didn't warn you." With the crowd reduced to essential personnel, family, Dr. Fox, Carlos, Sheriff Ford, and Lance, the atmosphere immediately became calmer. In the corral, Bandit's pacing slowed, though he remained alert and watchful. "Better?" Ivy said, nodding toward the fence. "He's settling down already." "Are you sure you want to do this today?" Gloria asked one final time. "We could wait until—" "Mom," Ivy interrupted gently, "there will always be reasons to wait. There will always be people who think it's too dangerous or too soon or too risky. But Bandit and I both know it's time." She began walking toward the corral with slow, deliberate steps, her white cane tapping softly against the ground. As she moved, she spoke to Bandit in the conversational tone that had become their communication method. "I know there were many people here, and I know that made you nervous. I'm sorry about that. I told them to leave because this is about us, not them." The stallion's ears pricked forward, and his movement shifted from agitated pacing to purposeful approach. He moved along the fence line, matching her pace as she drew closer. "I'm going to get a little closer today," Ivy continued. "Not because anyone told me to, but because I want to. Because I think you want me to." She stopped at the 12-foot mark, 3 feet closer than her usual position. The change seemed small to the watching adults, but the effect on Bandit was dramatic. He pressed against the fence so hard that the wooden posts groaned under the pressure. "Easy," Ivy said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. Just a little closer, that's all." Carlos watched intently as the stallion stretched his neck over the fence, reaching as far as anatomically possible toward the girl. "His body language is completely relaxed," he reported quietly. "No tension, no defensive posturing." Dr. Fox nodded, making notes on a clipboard. "Respiratory rate is normal. Eye contact is soft, not aggressive." "What about territorial behavior?" Sheriff Ford asked. "Watch this," Carlos said. He took a single step toward the fence, and Bandit's head immediately swung in his direction, ears flattening in warning. Carlos stepped back, and the stallion's attention returned to Ivy, his posture relaxing again. "He's claiming her," Carlos explained. "But it's protective claiming, not possessive. There's a difference." Ivy stood quietly at the fence, letting Bandit examine her with his eyes and nose. The stallion snuffled softly, his breath warm in the desert air. "You're a good boy," she said. "Simply a very good boy who's been through terrible things. But you're safe now. We're both safe." "Ivy," Dr. Fox called softly. "How does he feel to you right now?" "Peaceful," she replied without hesitation. For the first time since I've known him, he feels truly peaceful. The moment stretched between them, girl and horse connected by something deeper than sight or sound. In the watching adults, understanding began to dawn that they were witnessing something far more profound than simple animal training. Tomorrow, Ivy announced to the group, "I'm going to touch the fence." The statement sent ripples of concern through the assembled humans, but from the corral came only a soft, contented sigh that sounded remarkably like relief. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Lone Star Ranch like a protective blanket, offering the peace that daylight visitors had stolen away. Ivy slipped out of the house before anyone else stirred, her bare feet silent on the wooden porch. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with anticipation of what lay ahead. Today felt different, heavier somehow, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Bandit was already awake, his silhouette barely visible against the corral fence in the starlight. As Ivy approached, she could hear the soft rhythm of his breathing, calm and measured in the pre-dawn quiet. Without the crowd of anxious humans watching, both of them could simply exist together without performance or expectation. Couldn't sleep either, she whispered, settling cross-legged on the ground 10 feet from the fence, closer than she'd ever been while sitting. The stallion moved immediately to the nearest point, lowering his massive head until it was level with hers. In the darkness, neither could see the other clearly, but somehow that made their connection feel more pure, stripped of visual distractions, and reduced to the essential elements of trust and understanding. "Everyone's going to be watching today," Ivy said softly, waiting for something to go wrong, expecting disaster. "It makes me tired just thinking about it." Bandit snorted gently, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. In the past 2 weeks, she'd learned to distinguish between his various vocalizations, the sharp whinny of alarm, the questioning nicker of curiosity, and this soft rumble that seemed to mean simple acknowledgement. "I keep thinking about what Carlos said yesterday, about crossing into your personal space. The adults seem to think that's dangerous, but it doesn't feel dangerous to me. It feels necessary." The first hints of dawn began to creep across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and gold. Soon, the ranch would come alive with human activity, bringing with it all the complex emotions and expectations that complicated everything. "Before they all get here," Ivy said, rising to her feet, "I want to try something. Just between us." She took 3 steps forward, bringing herself within arm's reach of the fence. Bandit remained motionless, his breathing steady and calm. Slowly, carefully, Ivy extended her hand toward the wooden rail. Her fingers made contact with the weathered wood, and she felt the vibration of Bandit's movement through the fence. He was shifting closer, positioning himself directly opposite her hand. The warmth of his presence seemed to radiate through the barrier between them. "Hi," she whispered, and was answered by the softest possible nicker. The back door of the house creaked open and Gloria's voice carried across the yard. "Ivy, honey, where are you?" "Out here, Mom," Ivy called back, reluctantly stepping away from the fence. "Just talking to Bandit." Gloria appeared on the porch, wrapping a robe around herself against the morning chill. "You're up early, nervous." "About today." "Not nervous, excited." Ivy made her way back to the house, leaving Bandit standing sentinel at the fence. "This feels right, Mom. I know you're scared, but this feels like what we're supposed to be doing." "Supposed to be doing according to whom?" Gloria asked, though her tone was gentler than it had been in days. "According to both of us. Bandit wants this connection as much as I do. Maybe more." By 8 o'clock, the ranch yard was once again filling, with vehicles, though notably fewer than the previous day. Word of Ivy's dismissal of the crowd had spread, and only the most determined observers returned. Carlos arrived first, followed by Dr. Fox, then Sheriff Ford with a thermos of coffee and the resigned expression of someone expecting a long day. Lance emerged from the barn, carrying grooming supplies for the other horses, his movements careful and deliberate. Over the past weeks, he'd learned to read Bandit's moods almost as well as Ivy could, and today, the stallion seemed unusually focused. "He's been watching the house since sunrise," Lance reported to Chet. "Not pacing or agitated, just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Chet asked. "For her," Lance said simply. "He knows something's different about today." Dr. Fox set up his observation post with military precision, clipboard and pen at the ready. "I want to document every aspect of this interaction. Heart rate, respiratory patterns, body language, vocalizations, everything." Carlos nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. Whatever happens today, we'll have a complete record." "You mean when something goes wrong?" came Pearl Hunt's voice from across the yard. She'd arrived despite not being specifically invited, her face set in lines of grim determination. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't make one final attempt to prevent this disaster." Evie emerged from the house with Gloria close behind, both women's faces reflecting the weight of the moment ahead. The small gathering fell silent as they approached, all eyes focused on the 12-year-old girl who'd become the center of so much attention. "Mrs. Hunt," Ivy said politely, "I appreciate your concern, but I've made my decision." "Child, you don't understand what you're risking," Pearl replied desperately. "One wrong move, one unexpected sound, and that horse could react with deadly force." "He's had 2 weeks to hurt me if he wanted to," Ivy pointed out calmly. "He's never even made a threatening gesture in my direction." "That doesn't mean he won't," Pearl insisted. "Wild animals are unpredictable by nature." Carlos stepped forward diplomatically. "Pearl, I understand your position, but this horse is displaying classic bonding behaviors. In my professional opinion, the risk level is minimal." "Your professional opinion could be wrong," Pearl shot back. "And if it is, that child pays the price." Sheriff Ford cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ladies, gentlemen, I think we all understand the stakes here. Miss Ivy, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" "I'm certain," Ivy replied without hesitation. Gloria took a shaky breath. "Then let's get this over with before I change my mind and drag you back to the house." The group arranged itself in a loose semicircle around the corral, with Dr. Fox and Carlos positioned for optimal observation angles. Bandit stood at the fence, his attention completely focused on Ivy despite the presence of the other humans. "Remember," Carlos called out quietly, "if he shows any signs of stress or aggression, step back immediately." Ivy nodded and began her approach, moving with the same slow, deliberate pace she'd used for the past 2 weeks. As she walked, she maintained her conversation with Bandit, her voice steady and reassuring. "Here we go, boy. All these people watching. Us waiting to see what happens, but it's still just you and me, isn't it?" The stallion's ears remained pricked forward, tracking her movement with obvious anticipation. "I'm going to touch the fence today. I know you understand what that means. It means I trust you completely." She reached the fence and placed both hands flat against the wooden rail, directly opposite where Bandit stood. The stallion didn't move back or show any sign of alarm. Instead, he lowered his head until it was level with hers, separated only by the fence between them. "Remarkable, Doctor," Fox murmured, scribbling notes furiously. "No stress indicators whatsoever." "Look at his eyes," Carlos added quietly. "Completely soft and relaxed." Ivy stood motionless for several minutes, letting Bandit examine her through the fence. The stallion's breathing was so calm that she could feel it stirring her hair through the gaps between the rails. "You're such a good boy," she whispered. "Such a brave, good boy." Bandit responded with the softest possible nicker, a sound so quiet that only Ivy could hear it clearly. "Now what?" Sheriff Ford asked. "Now we wait," Carlos replied. "Let them set the pace for whatever comes next." As if responding to his words, Bandit did something that made everyone hold their breath. He reached his muzzle through the fence rails, stopping just inches from Ivy's face. "Oh my God," Gloria whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Don't move." Dr. Fox called out urgently, "Nobody move." But Ivy was already moving, slowly raising her hand toward Bandit's muzzle. The watchers braced for disaster, expecting the stallion to rear back or strike out in alarm. Instead, Bandit held perfectly still as Ivy's fingers made contact with the soft skin of his nose. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind across the desert and the distant sound of cattle in the far pastures. Girl and horse remained frozen in that moment of first touch, both seeming to understand the significance of the barrier they'd just crossed. "Well, I'll be damned," Sheriff Ford breathed. Pearl Hunt stared in open-mouthed shock, all her predictions of disaster crumbling in the face of what she was witnessing. "How does he feel?" Dr. Fox asked quietly. "Warm," Ivy replied, wonder evident in her voice. "And so soft. His breath is sweet, like grass and sunshine." Bandit closed his eyes as Ivy gently stroked his muzzle, the gesture so trusting and peaceful that several of the watching adults felt tears spring to their eyes. "This is impossible," Pearl murmured. "This shouldn't be happening." "But it is happening," Carlos replied gently, "and it's beautiful." After several minutes, Ivy slowly withdrew her hand and stepped back from the fence. Bandit watched her retreat with calm acceptance, making no attempt to follow or maintain the contact. "How do you feel?" Gloria asked, rushing to her daughter's side. "Different," Ivy said simply, "like something important just changed." "Changed how?" Carlos asked with professional interest. "I can't explain it exactly," Ivy said, searching for the right words. "But I don't think he's broken anymore. And I don't think I am either." The observation hung in the morning air like a revelation, carrying with it implications that none of them fully understood yet. In the corral, Bandit stood watching them with what could only be described as contentment, as if a long-held anxiety had finally been released. "What happens now?" Lance asked. "Now," Ivy said with a smile that transformed her entire face, "we find out what we can do together." 3 days after first contact, the atmosphere at Lone Star Ranch had shifted dramatically. Where once tension and worry dominated conversations, now there was an almost reverent quiet whenever Ivy and Bandit were together. The daily visitors had dwindled to a handful of dedicated observers, and even Pearl Hunt had begun watching from a respectful distance rather than voicing constant objections. The morning sky was overcast with heavy clouds that promised the first real rain Nevada had seen in months. Ivy could smell the moisture building in the air as she made her way to the corral, where Bandit waited with his now familiar positioning at the fence closest to the house. "Storm coming," she said to him, resting her hands on the wooden rail, where they'd touched 3 days before. "Can you feel it in the air? Everything's electric." Bandit pressed his muzzle against her palm through the fence, a greeting that had become as natural as breathing. His warm breath against her skin never failed to send a thrill of wonder through her. The reality of this connection still seemed miraculous. Dr. Fox emerged from his truck, carrying an unusual piece of equipment, a portable heart rate monitor designed for large animals. His scientific curiosity about the relationship had evolved into genuine research, and he'd been documenting changes in Bandit's stress markers since the breakthrough. "Morning, Ivy," he called out. "Mind if I take some readings while you're together?" "Go ahead," Ivy replied without taking her attention from Bandit. "He's used to you being around now." Carlos Rodriguez had become a semi-permanent fixture at the ranch, staying in the spare room above the barn while he observed and documented what he was beginning to call the most extraordinary human-animal bond he'd witnessed in 30 years of professional experience. This morning he carried a notebook filled with behavioral observations and theories about interspecies communication. "Ivy," Carlos said, approaching with his characteristic careful movements, "I'd like to try something different today, if you're willing." What kind of different? I want to see how Bandit responds to basic directional cues from you, not training commands, just simple requests. Gloria, who had been monitoring these daily sessions with decreasing anxiety and increasing amazement, looked up from her coffee. What do you mean by directional cues? Things like asking him to move left or right, to step forward or back, Carlos explained. It would tell us more about the depth of their communication. Lance appeared from the barn, leading Belle on a halter rope. The gentle mare had become part of their daily routine, providing a calm presence that seemed to help Bandit remain relaxed during the sessions. "How's our boy this morning?" Lance asked, nodding toward the corral. "Focused," Ivy replied. More focused than usual, actually. Like he's waiting for something specific to happen. As if responding to her words, Bandit lifted his head and looked toward the horizon. His ears pricked forward with sudden alertness, and his nostrils flared as he tested the wind. "What's he sensing?" "Doctor," Box asked, following the stallion's gaze. "I'm not sure," Ivy said, tilting her head to listen. "There's something distant, like engines, but not regular car engines." Carlos frowned, his professional instincts prickling with unease. "What kind of engines?" Before anyone could answer, the sound became clear to all of them, the distinctive rumble of multiple off-road vehicles approaching fast from the direction of Diamond Valley. The noise grew louder as whatever was coming drew closer, accompanied by shouts and the high-pitched whine of engines pushed to their limits. Bandit's reaction was immediate and dramatic. The stallion reared up on his hind legs, screaming in terror, a sound none of them had heard from him before. His eyes rolled white, and he began charging around the corral in a panic that dwarfed any previous agitation they'd witnessed. "What's happening to him?" Gloria shouted over the noise of Bandit's distress. "Trauma response," Carlos said grimly. "Something about those engines is triggering a memory." The approaching vehicles became visible now, 3 dirt bikes and 2 ATVs racing across the open range toward the ranch. Even from a distance, it was clear the riders were pursuing something, their machines kicking up clouds of dust as they navigated the rough terrain. "Those are the Morrison boys," Lance said, recognizing the lead rider. "Janet's nephews from Reno. What are they doing out here?" Sheriff Ford's patrol car appeared on the main road, racing toward the ranch with lights flashing. The lawman had clearly received reports of the disturbance and was responding with the urgency the situation seemed to demand. In the corral, Bandit's panic had reached a crescendo. The stallion threw himself against the fence with such force that the wooden posts groaned under the impact. Foam flew from his muzzle, and his breathing came in harsh, labored gasps. "He's going to hurt himself, Doctor," Fox said, rushing toward his truck for sedatives. "No," Ivy said sharply, moving closer to the fence, despite the dangerous display happening just feet away. "Don't sedate him. He needs to know he's safe." "Ivy, get back," Gloria shouted. "He's not rational right now." But Ivy was already at the fence, her hands pressed against the rail as she spoke, in the calm, conversational tone that had become their private language. "Bandit, listen to my voice. You're safe here. Whatever happened before, whatever those sounds remind you of, it's not happening now." The stallion continued his frenzied pacing, but his ears swiveled toward her voice even in his panic. "I know you're scared. I know those engines sound like something terrible from your past, but you're not alone this time. I'm here with you." Carlos watched in amazement as Bandit's movement began to slow slightly, though his breathing remained labored and his eyes still showed white around the edges. The off-road vehicles roared into the ranch yard, their engines revving aggressively as the riders circled the property. Janet Morrison's nephews, 3 young men in their 20s, with the reckless confidence of adrenaline junkies, seemed oblivious to the chaos they were causing. "Turn off the engines," Sheriff Ford bellowed as he climbed out of his patrol car. "Now!" "We're just having some fun, Sheriff," called out the lead rider, a lanky man with sun-bleached hair. Chasing jackrabbits through the valley. Didn't know we weren't supposed to be here. This is private property, Chet said, emerging from the barn with anger written across his weathered features. And you're terrorizing my animals. In the corral, Bandit had pressed himself against the far fence, as far from the machines as possible, while still maintaining visual contact with Ivy. His sides heaved with exertion, and his entire body trembled with residual terror. "Look what you've done to him," Ivy said, her young voice carrying an authority that made the riders shift uncomfortably on their machines. "It's just a horse," one of the nephews said dismissively. "Horses are supposed to be tough. That horse survived something traumatic involving engines like yours," Carlos said coldly. "You've just forced him to relive it." Sheriff Ford was taking down license numbers and demanding identification from the riders, his face grim with professional disapproval. "Reckless endangerment, trespassing, disturbing the peace," he muttered as he wrote. "Sheriff," Dr. Fox called out urgently, "we need to clear this area immediately. The stallion is showing signs of severe psychological distress." The engines finally fell silent, but the damage had been done. Bandit remained pressed against the far fence, his breathing gradually slowing, but his eyes still wild with remembered terror. "Everyone except essential personnel needs to leave," Carlos announced with quiet authority. "This animal needs calm and quiet to recover." As the various vehicles departed, some voluntarily, others under Sheriff Ford's stern encouragement, Ivy remained at the fence, maintaining her steady stream of reassuring conversation. "They're gone now. The loud engines are gone, and they're not coming back. Sheriff Ford won't let them come back." Slowly, painfully, Bandit began to move away from the far fence. His steps were hesitant, fearful, but his attention remained fixed on Ivy's voice. "That's it. One step at a time. You don't have to be brave all at once." It took nearly an hour for Bandit to work his way back across the corral to where Ivy waited. When he finally reached the fence, he was trembling with exhaustion, but he pressed his muzzle against her outstretched hand with desperate need. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Carlos, who had been documenting the entire episode, looked up from his notes with a troubled expression. "Ivy, what happened here today tells us something important about Bandit's past." "What do you mean?" "Those engines triggered a specific trauma response. The panic, the terror, the way he tried to escape. It suggests he witnessed something violent involving off-road vehicles." Dr. Fox nodded grimly. "Probably the incident that scattered his herd. Poachers often use ATVs and dirt bikes to chase wild horses. So he saw his family being hunted," Ivy said quietly, understanding dawning in her voice. "Most likely," Carlos confirmed. And today, for a few minutes, he was reliving that experience. Gloria, who had watched the entire episode with growing concern, approached her daughter carefully. "Honey, are you all right? That was intense." "I'm fine, Mom, but Bandit isn't fine. He's going to need time to recover from this." As if understanding her words, the stallion pressed closer to the fence, seeking the comfort of her presence. In his eyes, the wild panic had been replaced by something else, a deeper dependence on the girl who had talked him through his darkest moment. "Something's changed," Carlos observed quietly. "What do you mean?" Chet asked. "Look at him. He's not just bonded to Ivy anymore. After what happened today, he's completely dependent on her for emotional security." The implications of this observation hung heavy in the desert air, carrying with them the weight of responsibility that neither Ivy nor her family had fully anticipated. "What does that mean for us?" Gloria asked. "It means," Ivy said softly, never taking her eyes off Bandit, "that we belong to each other now, completely." 1 week after the engine incident, an uneasy peace had settled over Lone Star Ranch. Bandit had recovered physically from his panic attack, but the psychological effects lingered. He'd become hyper-vigilant, startling at sounds that previously wouldn't have bothered him. More significantly, his dependence on Ivy had intensified to the point where he would pace restlessly whenever she was out of sight for more than a few minutes. The morning brought unexpected visitors in the form of Dr. Amanda Foster, an equine behavior specialist from the University of Nevada, and Maria Santos, a traveling horse trainer whose reputation for working with traumatized animals had reached Carlos Rodriguez's network of professionals. "I had to see this for myself," Dr. Foster explained as she climbed out of her vehicle, professional skepticism written across her features. "The reports I've received strain credibility." Maria Santos moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent her life reading animal behavior. Her dark eyes took in every detail of the ranch setup, lingering on the corral where Bandit stood watching their arrival with obvious anxiety. "The horse is stressed," Maria observed immediately. "Recent trauma." Engine noise triggered a flashback. "Last week," Carlos explained, greeting his colleague with genuine warmth. "He's been more anxious since then." Ivy emerged from the house with Gloria, her steps measured and deliberate as she sensed the tension radiating from the new arrivals. Bandit's soft whinny of greeting carried across the yard, and she could hear him moving restlessly in his enclosure. "Dr. Foster, Ms. Santos," Ivy said politely, though her attention was clearly focused on Bandit's distress. "I know you've come to observe, but he's having a difficult morning." "That's exactly what I want to see," Dr. Foster replied, pulling out a tablet to record her observations. "How you handle his anxiety episodes." "I don't handle them," Ivy said simply, making her way toward the corral. "I just stay with him until they pass." Lance appeared from the barn, his face creased with concern. "Miss Ivy, he's been pacing since sunrise. Won't eat his hay, won't drink water, just keeps watching for you." "I know," Ivy said softly. "I can hear it in his movement. He's afraid something's going to take me away from him." She approached the fence with her usual calm confidence, but today Bandit's reaction was more intense than usual. The stallion pressed against the rails with such force that the wood groaned, stretching his neck desperately toward her, as if trying to eliminate every inch of distance between them. "Easy, boy," Ivy murmured, placing both hands flat against his muzzle through the fence. "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Foster typed rapidly on her tablet, documenting the interaction with clinical precision. "Remarkable. His stress indicators are dropping measurably just from her presence." "Look at his breathing," Maria added quietly. "From labored to normal." In under 30 seconds, the morning air was split by the distant sound of a helicopter approaching from the east. The rhythmic thump of rotor blades grew steadily louder, and Bandit's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The stallion reared up with a scream that echoed across the ranch, his eyes rolling white with terror. "Not again," Gloria breathed, recognizing the signs of another trauma response. But this time was different. Instead of charging around the corral in panic, Bandit did something that shocked everyone present. He positioned himself between the approaching sound and Ivy, his body language shifting from terrified flight to protective aggression. "He's guarding her," Maria whispered in amazement. The helicopter, a medical transport en route to Reno, passed overhead without landing, but its presence had triggered something profound in Bandit's psychology. Even as the sound faded into the distance, the stallion remained in his protective stance, ears pinned back and muscles coiled for action. "Bandit," Ivy said gently, "the helicopter is gone. It wasn't a threat to either of us." The stallion turned his head toward her voice, but didn't abandon his defensive position. His breathing remained elevated, and his attention continued to scan the sky for additional dangers. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Foster murmured, her clinical detachment giving way to genuine wonder. "He's overcome his own fear response to protect her." "How is that possible?" Chet asked, emerging from the equipment shed where he'd been working. Maternal behavior, Maria explained. Or in this case, paternal. When animals form protective bonds strong enough to override survival instincts, it indicates a fundamental shift in their psychological priorities. Carlos nodded in agreement. We're witnessing the final stage of bonding. Bandit now considers Ivy's safety more important than his own. Dr. Fox, who had been monitoring the situation from his truck, approached with his medical equipment. I need to check his stress levels after that response. The physical strain of overriding panic with protective behavior could be significant. As the veterinarian began his examination from outside the corral, another vehicle appeared on the horizon. This one moved slowly, deliberately, kicking up minimal dust as it approached the ranch. Sheriff Ford's patrol car pulled into the yard, followed by an unfamiliar sedan with government plates. "Now what?" Lance muttered. But his question was answered when Sheriff Ford emerged with a woman in her 50s wearing a tailored suit and carrying an official-looking briefcase. "Folks," Sheriff Ford called out, "this is Jennifer Walsh from the Nevada Department of Agriculture. She's here about some concerns that have been raised." Jennifer Walsh surveyed the assembled group with the efficient gaze of a bureaucrat accustomed to complicated situations. "I've received reports about an unlicensed therapeutic animal program being operated here. There are questions about insurance, liability, and proper oversight." "There's no program," Chet said firmly. "This is my granddaughter visiting with a horse on my property. Sir, when that interaction involves a previously dangerous animal and draws professional observers from multiple institutions, it becomes a matter of public interest," Walsh replied diplomatically. "I'm here to assess whether regulation is necessary." Ivy, who had been listening to this exchange while maintaining contact with Bandit, finally turned to address the official. "Ms. Walsh, what would it take to satisfy your concerns?" "Professional evaluation of the animal's psychological state and the safety protocols being followed," Walsh replied. "Documentation that this relationship isn't putting anyone at risk." "The animal's psychological state is excellent," Dr. Foster interjected, looking up from her tablet. "In fact, what I'm observing here challenges several fundamental assumptions about interspecies bonding and safety protocols," Walsh asked. "Are being followed to the letter," Carlos added. "This young lady has demonstrated more natural understanding of horse behavior than most trained professionals." Sheriff Ford removed his hat and scratched his head thoughtfully. "Jennifer, I've been monitoring this situation for weeks. There haven't been any incidents, any injuries, any public safety concerns. What about liability if something goes wrong?" Walsh pressed. "What about the liability of separating them?" Maria Santos asked quietly. "This horse has formed a protective bond with this child. Forcing separation could cause psychological damage to both of them." As if to emphasize her point, Bandit moved closer to the fence, pressing his body against the rails as he sensed tension in the human conversation. His attention remained split between Ivy and the strangers discussing his fate. "I can demonstrate his protective behavior if you need proof," Ivy offered. "Absolutely not," Gloria said immediately. "We are not putting you at risk to satisfy bureaucratic requirements." "Mom, I wouldn't be at risk. That's the point. Bandit protects me now." Dr. Foster looked up from her documentation with excitement. "Actually, that might be exactly what we need to prove. A controlled demonstration of the protective bonding behavior." "What kind of demonstration?" Walsh asked suspiciously. "Nothing dangerous," Carlos assured everyone. "Simply having someone Bandit doesn't know approach Ivy while she's at the fence. His response would demonstrate the nature of their relationship. And if he attacks the approaching person," Walsh challenged. "He won't attack," Ivy said with quiet confidence. "He'll warn them off, but he won't hurt anyone unless they ignore the warning and try to force contact." Danny Moore Lance's 14-year-old brother, chose that moment to arrive on his bicycle, completely unaware of the tension surrounding the adults. He hopped off and began walking toward the group with the casual confidence of someone familiar with the ranch. "Hey, everybody," Danny called out cheerfully. "Lance said you might need help with..." His greeting was cut short by Bandit's sharp whinny of warning. The stallion moved immediately between Danny and Ivy, his ears flattened and his posture clearly threatening. "Danny, stop where you are," Carlos called out calmly. The teenager froze, suddenly aware that every adult was watching him with intense focus. "Bandit," Ivy said gently, "Danny is Lance's brother. He's not a threat to me." The stallion's ears swiveled toward her voice, but he maintained his protective stance. "Danny, take 3 steps backwards, slowly," Carlos instructed. As the teenager complied, Bandit's posture gradually relaxed, though he continued to watch the boy with obvious suspicion. "Remarkable," Dr. Foster breathed. "He's discriminating between familiar and unfamiliar individuals, and positioning himself strategically to intercept any approach," Maria added. "This isn't just protective behavior, it's tactical thinking." Jennifer Walsh had witnessed the entire demonstration with growing amazement. "I've never seen anything like that." "Because there's never been anything like this," Carlos said with certainty. "What we're observing here is a unique interspecies bond that defies conventional understanding." "So what does that mean for regulation?" Sheriff Ford asked. Walsh closed her briefcase with a snap of finality. "It means we document everything and recommend that this situation be allowed to continue under professional supervision. The therapeutic value appears to outweigh any regulatory concerns." As the various officials and experts began packing up their equipment and preparing to leave, Ivy remained at the fence with Bandit, both of them seeming exhausted by the constant scrutiny and evaluation. "What happens now?" Gloria asked Carlos quietly. "Now," he replied, watching the girl and stallion together, "we find out what miracles are possible when 2 broken souls heal each other completely." 2 months had passed since Jennifer Walsh's visit, and Lone Star Ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt both miraculous and natural. The story of Ivy and Bandit had spread far beyond Birch Creek, drawing visitors from across the country who came seeking to understand what many were calling the most extraordinary human-animal bond ever documented. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman stepped out of her luxury sedan on a crisp October morning, her silver hair catching the autumn sunlight. The 65-year-old philanthropist had driven from San Francisco after reading Dr. Foster's published research paper about the case. Behind her emerged a younger woman carrying camera equipment and a man with the purposeful bearing of a business executive. "Mr. Stone," Mrs. Whitman called out, approaching Chet with an extended hand. "I'm Eleanor Whitman from the Whitman Foundation. I believe Dr. Rodriguez contacted you about our visit." Chet wiped his hands on his work shirt before shaking hers. "Yes, ma'am, though I'm not sure what a foundation wants with a ranch in Nevada. We specialize in funding innovative therapeutic programs," Mrs. Whitman explained, her eyes already scanning the property for signs of the famous girl and stallion. "What's happening here has implications far beyond your ranch." Ivy emerged from the house with her customary confidence, white cane tapping softly as she navigated toward the corral, where Bandit waited. The stallion's greeting whinny carried across the yard, and even the newcomers could see his immediate focus on the approaching girl. "There they are," the younger woman whispered, raising her camera. "It's really true. Patricia, no photographs." "Without permission," Mrs. Whitman said firmly. "We're guests here." Dr. Foster appeared from behind the barn, where she'd been setting up monitoring equipment for another research session. Her weekly visits had become routine, each one adding to the growing body of scientific literature about interspecies therapeutic. "Bonding, Mrs. Whitman," Dr. Foster called out in greeting. "Perfect timing. We're about to begin today's observation session." "What kind of observations?" the executive asked, introducing himself as Robert Chen from the Foundation's Development Board. "Cognitive communication patterns," Dr. Foster replied, consulting her tablet. "We're documenting how Ivy and Bandit have developed their own nonverbal language." Carlos emerged from the barn, his notebook as always in hand. Over the past months, he'd compiled what was becoming the definitive study of their relationship, documenting behaviors and responses that challenged conventional understanding of animal psychology. "Today's session is special," Carlos announced to the gathering group. "We're going to test the limits of their communication system." "What do you mean?" Gloria asked, joining them from the house where she'd been preparing lunch for the expected crowd. "We want to see if Bandit can understand complex instructions from Ivy," Carlos explained. "Not simple directional cues, but actual problem-solving requests." Lance approached from the far pasture, leading Belle on a halter. "What kind of problems?" "We've set up a simple obstacle course in the south paddock," Dr. Foster said, pointing toward a fenced area where several poles and barrels had been arranged. "If Bandit truly understands Ivy's communication, he should be able to navigate it based on her voice alone." "From outside the paddock?" Mrs. Whitman asked with obvious skepticism. "That's the test," Carlos confirmed. "Ivy will remain outside the fence, and Bandit will move through the course following only her verbal guidance." Sheriff Ford's patrol car pulled into the yard, followed by Dr. Fox's familiar truck. Word of the special session had spread through the tight-knit community of professionals who'd been following the case. "Quite a crowd today," Sheriff Ford observed, climbing out with his usual measured movements. "Hope we're not putting too much pressure on the youngster." "She's handling it better than most adults would," Dr. Fox replied, setting up his monitoring station. "Her confidence has grown remarkably over these past months." At the corral, Ivy stood with her hands resting on the fence rail while Bandit pressed his muzzle against her palm. To the watching experts, their communication appeared almost telepathic. Tiny shifts in posture and breathing that somehow conveyed complex emotional information. "Are you ready for something new today?" Ivy asked the stallion softly. "Something that will show everyone how smart you really are?" Bandit nickered in response, a sound that everyone present had learned to recognize as eager agreement. Lance opened the corral gate while Carlos moved to the obstacle course paddock. The plan was simple in concept, but revolutionary in execution. Bandit would be released into the course, while Ivy remained outside, guiding him through the obstacles using only her voice. "This is insane," Patricia whispered to her camera equipment. A blind girl directing a formerly wild horse through an obstacle course by voice alone. "If it works," Mrs. Whitman murmured, "it will redefine our understanding of interspecies communication." Bandit moved calmly from his corral to the course paddock, his attention completely focused on Ivy despite the crowd of observers. Once inside the fenced area, he positioned himself near the starting point and waited. "Okay, boy," Ivy called out, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. "3 steps forward, then turn left toward the sound of my voice." The stallion moved exactly as instructed, his hoofbeats precise and deliberate. "Perfect. Now there's a low rail about 6 feet in front of you. You can step over it easily." Bandit approached the obstacle and stepped over it without hesitation, then looked back toward Ivy for the next instruction. "Amazing," Dr. Foster breathed, documenting every movement. "He's not just following commands, he's problem-solving based on her descriptions." The course continued with increasing complexity. Ivy guided Bandit around barrels, through narrow passages between poles, and over a series of low jumps. Each obstacle was navigated smoothly, with the stallion pausing after each completion to await further guidance. "How is this possible?" Robert Chen asked Carlos. "She can't see what he's doing." "She doesn't need to see," Carlos replied. "She can hear his movement, his breathing, even the sound of his hooves on different surfaces. Plus, they've developed such a deep bond that she can sense his confidence or uncertainty." The final obstacle was the most challenging, a narrow zigzag path between closely spaced poles that required precise navigation. "This one's tricky," Ivy called out. "Start between the first two poles, then immediately turn right. Small steps, and listen for my voice to guide you." Bandit entered the zigzag pattern with careful deliberation, his massive frame threading between the poles with surprising grace. Ivy's voice provided constant guidance, adjusting his path with tiny corrections that demonstrated an almost supernatural awareness of his position. Left now, just a little perfect. 2 more steps forward, then right again. The watching crowd held its breath as horse and girl worked together to solve the puzzle. When Bandit emerged from the final turn, completing the course flawlessly, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the observers. "Incredible," Mrs. Whitman said, her businesslike demeanor giving way to genuine emotion. "I've never seen anything like it." But the most remarkable moment was yet to come. As Lance moved to open the paddock gate so Bandit could return to Ivy, a red-tailed hawk suddenly swooped low over the course, its hunting cry piercing the air. The sound triggered an immediate response from Bandit, not the panic of his trauma responses, but something entirely different. The stallion moved quickly to position himself between the hawk's flight path and where Ivy stood outside the fence, rearing up slightly and calling out a warning that sent the bird veering away. "Did you see that?" Dr. Foster exclaimed. He protected her from a perceived aerial threat that she couldn't even see. "It's not just bonding anymore," Carlos said quietly. "He's appointed himself as her guardian against all potential dangers." Mrs. Whitman approached Ivy as Bandit was returned to her side, the stallion immediately pressing close to the fence for their customary contact. "Miss Parker," Mrs. Whitman said, "what you've accomplished here is extraordinary. The Whitman Foundation would like to offer you something." "What kind of something?" Gloria asked, moving protectively closer to her daughter. "A full scholarship to our equine therapy program at Stanford, with Bandit included," Mrs. Whitman explained. "You could help develop treatments for other traumatized animals and the people who need them." The offer hung in the desert air like a promise of futures none of them had imagined when a grieving girl first arrived at her grandfather's ranch. "I don't need to think about it," Ivy said, her hand still resting on Bandit's muzzle. "Yes." Just like that, Gloria asked, "Mom, this is what Bandit and I are supposed to do together. Help other people understand that being broken doesn't mean being worthless, that healing is possible when someone believes in you." Dr. Foster looked up from her final documentation with tears in her eyes. "You know what the most remarkable thing is? She's right. Everything we've witnessed here proves that connection transcends limitation, that love creates possibilities where none existed before." Carlos closed his notebook with a sense of completion. What started as a traumatized horse that no one could help has become a partnership that could help thousands of others. As the sun began to set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple that Ivy could only imagine, the crowd of observers gradually dispersed. Each carried with them the memory of witnessing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the boundaries between species, the nature of communication, and the healing power of unconditional trust. In the corral, Bandit stood quietly beside the fence where Ivy remained, both of them seeming to understand that their journey together was just beginning. What had started as a desperate attempt to save a killer Mustang had become proof that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles emerge from the deepest wounds, when two broken souls find each other and discover they're not broken at all. They're just perfectly designed to heal together. The story that began with a blind girl trying to tame a dangerous horse had become something far more profound. Evidence that love, patience, and understanding could transform not just individual lives, but the very definition of what was possible between humans and the animals who shared their world. And in Birch Creek, Nevada, where desert winds carried whispers of hope across endless horizons, everyone who witnessed their bond knew they had seen something that would change how the world understood the mysterious connections that bind all living creatures together. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch, and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.